What's going on, guys? Car coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we dive into some more top meta decks for rotation of the most recent bans. I kind of gave it a little bit of time before I made an updated video onto what exactly is currently the meta as a whole, as it took a little bit of time for the meta to kind of develop, but we kind of have a clear path as to kind of like the top-ish 5 decks that are kind of currently being played in a best of one standard in MTG Arena. Now, I wouldn't say that the way that these decks are in order determine that how good they are against one another. These are just like, you know, the population of people who run the MTG Assist client. These are the decks that majority of the people are playing. So we're going to start at the bottom of the list, go from the least represented to the most represented deck in all of MTG Arena. With that being said, guys, if you like the video, hit that like button, but let's dive into the first deck and let's talk about it. Alright, so the first deck up on the list is a Rakdos MidRange deck. Overall, the concept of this deck is to be kind of aggressive, but at the same time too trying to establish yourself to be very aggressive in the middle of the game or so. Playing a lot of things for some spot removal and creature removal to kind of get the deck going, playing into Kroxa and things like that to kind of get the overall momentum of the field onto your side. Dropping a giant Terror of the Peaks and the end game to kind of like play things, deal damage to your opponent's face and or creatures to remove them, as well as keep their hand controlled. Like I said, the way this deck does it is in the early game you can play things like some Blood Chief's Thirst, some Heartless Axe, Mire trying to start filling up your graveyard. We do also run Kroxa to kind of like target your opponent's hand to kind of make them discard cards if they don't discard, you know, anything but if they discard lands. Other than that, they will take 3 damage. We do have the Shadow Smashing for some mana fixing, as well as some board removal in case we need to kind of remove multiple creatures. Timber's Call to kind of establish a board on the field. We got Bone Crusher Giant because it's a solid card in the sense that it's a spot removal, as well as a 4/3. Nighthawk Scavenger because if we're moving things and our opponent's discarding things into their graveyard, this thing's gonna get bigger and bigger. Has Flying, Death Touch, and Lifelink, which makes it very solid for this deck, as well as a few other things like we got Rankle in here for the same concept to make players discard cards, to make players lose a life and draw a card, or even sacrifice creatures if we're starting to get into the late game. We want to just kind of, you know, keep their things on the battlefield from really sticking onto the battlefield as a whole. Liliana is another card that also makes the deck, as well as the ability to make our opponent discard a card. If they can't, they now lose life. -3 to give target creature -X/-X for some of our cards in our graveyard, as well as the -7 if we do get there to get something back, get back target creature card from a graveyard to the battlefield under our control, and it gains haste. And then we got a Hygor Mullen just because of all the non-creature lands. This allows us to kind of possibly get a 3 mana removal spell. If not, we get a 4 mana removal spell, as well as in the game if our opponent's not playing a lot of creatures, we can always play it as a land, so that's good in that sense. And like I said, Terror of the Peaks is kind of like the icing on the cake. If we can get to this point, Terror of the Peaks comes on the battlefield. It's a 5/4 already. Suppose your opponent's deck the target Terror of the Peaks makes our opponents now take additional 3 life to cast it on him. So if they try to spot removal him, bounce him, try to burn him, any of those things, they're going to take 3 damage to also do that, as well as the ability, like I said before, if we play any of our other creatures onto the battlefield, they're going to take damage equal to that creature's power to any target, whether it be the creature or to our opponent's face, to be very aggressive in the end game and kind of, you know, hit them really hard. This is the side. This is the land base here. We got Castle Lifegain for some card draw in the end, towards the end game if we're starting to get late in cards in our hand. We got some swamps, some mountains, you know, 6 and 5. Temple of Malice. There isn't a pathway, unfortunately, for black red, so we don't play a pathway here. You could also play the commons and uncommon lands. I think it's actually commons now that I'm thinking about it. The common lands that come into play tapped. I really like the ones that gain life. I'm not sure how strong I think the Scry is, especially with rogues trying to set up the top card of your library playing against a rogue deck. The Scry lands are kind of iffy in that situation. And then we got Fabled Passage also help fix our mana. Overall, the deck is pretty interesting. This is kind of like my own little spin on it because I kind of tweaked some numbers of things just because I went off of the lists that I saw on MTG Assistant, and then I kind of imported it into my own kind of spin on it, kind of added a couple extra copies of things, kind of got rid of a couple copies of things. I mean, it's always one of those things that if you kind of have like a list like this, you can always experiment with what numbers you think kind of work well overall for yourself. But with that being said, guys, let's move on to the next deck. The next deck on the list is Mono White Lifegain. Mono White Lifegain in a very aggressive format, as you will see on this list. There being a lot of decks that are just very aggressive and try to hit your opponent as hard as possible. Lifegain is kind of like combative, things kind of slow down those aggressive aggro decks in the sense that we're going to be gaining a life to kind of return the life that we're losing from our opponent's aggressive creatures, allowing us to kind of set up like this more mid-rangey style Lifegain style deck, allowing us also to have some spot removal in a sense, as we really don't have any true removal in white. The best thing we can do is kind of exile target things from the battlefield with our enchantments, as well as just play a lot of creatures that are just kind of like a little bit tougher and kind of, you know, give things protection from particular colors as well. With that being said, this is kind of like the mono white build I kind of went with. Like I said, you can kind of tweak it to how you want it based on what cards you have. This is kind of the version I went with. So we are going to play some Owl Seeds of Life's Bounties as well as Selfless Saviors. These are two things to kind of give any of our creatures indestructible and or protection from a particular color of our choice until end of turn. You can kind of tweak these depending on what you want. I like Owl Seeds of Life Bounty because it has a life link ability, and I kind of cut you know, some Selfless Saviors. You can do the other way if you want to. I just like having additional ways to gain more life. Speaker of the Heavens is a solid card for a mono white Lifegain deck just because it's a 1-mana 1/1 vigilance life linker with the ability to in the later game, you know, create that 4/4 white angel token with flying onto the battlefield if we have 7 more life than our starting life total. To round up our 2-drops, we have Daxos, which is a very solid devotion style card, allowing us to give it more toughness, the more things with devotion we have for white on the battlefield, and then also the ability that whenever we play a creature or whenever a creature dies, we're going to be gaining some life. Hallowed Priest is the card that's only for best of 1 in the sense that it's like the new Pride Mate, in the sense every time we gain life, it gets +1/+1. So this is definitely a good card that's definitely gonna get very big if our opponent can't deal with it. Glass Casket for that spot removal, kind of like exile target thing that costs 3 or less. That is kind of in our way, or just something that's super annoying on the battlefield. We can always play Glass Casket on it. Wow. We got Banishing Light for the other spot removal in the 3-drop slot. Like I said, there's not really, other than playing board wipes, there's not really other spot removal cards in white for the most part. We got Heliod's Sun's Crown because we're playing lifelink. The ability to give things +1/+1 counters every time we gain life is very good, and also being able to tap 2 mana and give things lifelink is also very, very good as well. Also another card that gets higher, becomes a 5/5 indestructible as long as they have 5 or more devotion, which in this deck a lot of things have you know, at least 1 devotion, if not multiple, in their cost. Basari's Ket is another card in the deck that's a 3 mana planeswalker. We can put +1/+1 counter on 1 creature. It gains indestructible. We can -2, and whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack, create that many 1/1 white soldier tokens on the battlefield tapped and attacking. Or -6 if we get to there. We can give target. You get an emblem at the beginning of our combat. Your turn. You get a 1/1 white soldier creature token. You get a +1/+1 on each creature we control. So overall, just making our board that much stronger. Linden for the devotion, as well as the ability to gain life whenever one of our creatures attack. So whenever a creature attacks, we gain 1 life for each attacking creature. It has vigilance itself, so it each triggers individually, which in turn then triggers individually Heliod's Sun's Crown. Hollow Priest triggers to get more counters, things like that. It kind of helps us out overall. Lures of the Dream Den to kind of get back some other things that are smaller drops from our graveyard, like the Selfless Saviors, the Owl Seeds of Life Bounties. Those are very good cards just to keep on reoccurring to annoy our opponent. If they can't get rid of the Luris, we're just going to keep on reoccurring over and over again, you know, these 1-drop creatures, and just kind of replaying them, and our opponent's just going to get annoyed and probably scoop at that point. In the top part of our deck, we have Basari's Lieutenant here as the 4-drop. Vigilance 3/4, protection from multicolor. When it enters the battlefield, you get to put +1/+1 creature +1/+1 counter target creature we control. Whenever Basari's Lieutenant or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter creature, create a 2/2 white creature token with vigilance onto the battlefield. So essentially, if one of our creatures die, we get to replace it with a 2/2 vigilance creature. As long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it, we have ways to give our things +1/+1 counters. So hopefully, in a sense, these things will kind of replace themselves with new creatures. Which also, if our opponent has board wipes, this is kind of our way to protect it. We also have Elspeth's Sun's Nemesis, 4-drop planeswalker with the ability to give creatures +2/+1 up to 2 creatures. -2 for 1 white human soldier white 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, or -3 for gaining some life, which is very good, especially if our opponent's playing super aggressive, or we just want to kind of get to like 27 for the Speaker of the Heavens. This will definitely work out for us in that sense, and we can always recur for 6 mana and exile 4 cards from our graveyard. Then we also played the other Basari that I don't think you really get impacts. I think you have to craft this individually. What it does is we can +1, put a +1/+1 counter up to 1 target creature we control. It gains vigilance until end of turn. -1 whenever a creature attacks this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then -6 when creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain fly until end of turn. So that's kind of like the big finisher. I actually kind of like the -1 here. It says whenever a creature attacks, so if we attack with our whole board, all our creatures are going to get +1/+1 counters on it. Combine that with a Basari's Lieutenant, our Basri, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. This then will pretty much replace any of your creatures that do die in that particular attack, which is very, very good. And then the mana base is pretty straightforward. What it's trying to do, just get out Castle Ardenvales and Plains, 20 and 4. Overall, this is a very fun deck to play, especially if you don't want to play the super aggressive like Haster or that style deck. This is kind of one of those decks to kind of combat it just because of all the life gain. The next deck up is a deck that I feel like everyone's seen a lot of, just because I feel like it's been around even in 2021 Standard and even before that, like after M21 came out, and that is mono green aggro, I guess is the best way to put it. Essentially what it is just a deck that plays a lot of just very strong, powerful mono green things. We have things to fight our opponent's creatures. We have some key things that stand out in the deck, allowing us to kind of like make it very awkward for our opponent to interact with what we have going on the board. For example, we have a 1-drop with the Love Struck Beast, allowing us to play 1-white creatures onto the battlefield. Of course, there's no Lucky Clover, so we don't get multiple 1-white human token creatures, but we do get a 1-drop on turn 1. We also play Oran Reef Ooze is a card I'm experimenting with. I actually kind of like it, allowing us to give +1/+1 counter target creature we control whenever it attacks. Put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, making a lot of things that will have counters on it that much stronger. We got Carrick's Harbinger, which allows us to kind of like scoop the top few cards of our library, look for a creature card, put it to our hand, as long as it deals damage, and has hexproof from black, which means it can't get spot removal from black, which is very good in that sense. Yorvo is another card that just gets stronger and stronger the more green creatures we play. We got Scavenge News to target our opponent's graveyard, get rid of things we don't really want in there, allowing us to gain +1/+1 counters if it's a creature, and gain a life as well. Stonecoil Serpent's just a very strong, tap it for whatever we need at the time to get what we want. So essentially, turn 1 we get to play it for a 1/1, turn 2 2/2, so on and so forth, which is very good. Has reach and trample. In the end game, we can always play for like a 5, 6, 7, 8. Whatever mana you have open, you just want to play something big, which is good in that sense. You can then put it with a Gem Raiser, which is a good card to target our opponent's artifacts and enchantments. As much as there aren't as many as there used to be, it's still very good to have. It gives our Stonecoil Serpent reach and trample, as well as additional 4/4 toughness and power, which then stacks on the already counters that are already on it, which makes it that much better. Quest and Beast isn't as strong as it used to be because there aren't as many planeswalkers, but the Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste is still very good at 4/4/4, and the fact that it can't be chumped by little small things, which is also very good as well. Garruk Unleash is another good card here because it allows our creatures to become that much stronger. Also give them trample until end of turn. If we're behind on creatures, we're going to pump out 3/3 beast tokens. And if we get to the 7, we can look at the beginning of our end step. We may search our library for a creature card, put onto the battlefield, and shuffle our library if we get to that point. But essentially, what we're trying to do is just trying to beat down our opponent by hit him for additional 3/3 tramplers to the face, or make him more beasts just to get wider than them. Elder Gargoth is just another solid card in the deck just because it's a 5 mana 6/6er with Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, and whenever it attacks our blocks, we start pumping out creatures, gain some life, draw a card depending on whatever the situation is. And as well, because it wouldn't be a mono green deck, there is also Great Engine here. It's a 9 mana artifact, legendary artifact that costs X less, where it equals the greatest power creature we control, and then it makes 2 mana, and whenever we play a creature enters the battlefield, to get a +1/+1 counter on it, and we draw a card. So essentially we fill in our hand once we play the creature. Very, very interesting deck. The one thing I will say, the one I didn't even realize when I was looking at this deck and also building it and tweaking it, I didn't actually add any Castle Garenbrigs, which is something that you should add to the deck. When I do post the deck link on Aetherhub, you can click on that and actually tweak it to add it. I just don't have them here, but I will add them in the actual link that will be down in the description below. Next deck on the list is a deck that you've probably seen a bunch of times before. It has gone through many iterations. This is kind of like my iteration of it, but that is mono red aggro, which essentially is a deck that just kind of has a decent curve. It is very aggressive, especially when it's on the play. Once you're behind against it, it definitely is tough to recuperate yourself once you fall behind. And it's pretty much the thing is, you play turn 1, you probably want to play a Fervent Champion just because it's a 1/1 haster with first strike and haste. If you have another one of these out, you then pump the other one giving you, you know, +1/+1, +1/+0, and then also making our equip abilities cost 3 less to activate, which is essentially if our anything dies by Embercleave, we can always throw it on a Fervent Champion. Chargers in here from Zendikar Rising as haste as long as it's equipped, and whenever it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Spikefield Hazard's a good way to kind of, you know, spot removal like small little creatures, as well as it can be a land, so it's definitely good in that sense. Brimrock Knight to kind of pump our creatures once they do attack for the pump ability, as well as playing a 3/1 aggressive creature if we want to. Robber of the Rich, because why not? It's a very solid 2-drop 2/2 reach haster, and if we have less cards in our hand than our opponent, we now get to take the top card of the library, exile it into our side of the field, and then we can play it as if it was any mana of any color, which is very good in that sense. It definitely annoys your opponent. Even if we don't hit anything, we hit a land, it gets exiled, so we're technically milling our opponent with this card. Shatter Skull Smashing, another good card here in the sense that you can tap it to do X damage to target creatures divided as we choose, or you can play it as a land, being very aggressive, you know, paying 3 life. Bunkers Giant for more spot removal, as well as a 4/3 body. Slaying Fire is a card that I kind of liked from my budget mono red build, and I'm actually going to try it here just because, you know, we're only playing red mana, so why not? It's a 3 mana instant speed. It can deal 3 damage, or if we play all red mana to play it, which is essentially what we're going to do every time we play it, we actually deal 4 damage instead. Annex, because Annex is just good in the deck because it's you know, powers X3 equal to the amount of, you know, devotion we have, and essentially everything has a devotion of some sort, especially once you start getting the Torbrands and the Embercleave, the devotion starts going up really crazily. And of course Torbrand for the additional +2 damage from any of our red sources, and the Embercleave for the big finisher. The land base is just, you know, Castle Empress and mountains here. Overall, this is a very interesting deck. It's very good. It really, like I said, you've seen one version, you've probably seen them all. This is just my little tweak on some cards I'm messing around with. You know, take what you want, you know, add some of the red cards that you like for the deck, but overall this is a red deck that really hasn't changed too much. It's just like it lost a few things, but we kind of replaced it with other things. And the last deck up is no surprise. This is actually the most popular deck, I think, by a good chunk, actually, compared to like mono red, and that is Dimir Rogues. This here is a little bit of a flash style. It's not super flashy as I feel like I've seen other versions of it, but I've kind of taken a little bit of the flash version, taken a little bit of the very basic standard version of Dimir Rogues that you do see, and kind of put my own little spin on it. Overall, the deck is pretty good. You know, it's very aggressive. It, you know, works kind of like a, you know, it's a more reactive deck in the sense of what you're going to do against your opponent. It's very effective on how things work overall and how they play out when it comes to certain things. You know, we are in the 1-drops, everything's very cheap. You know, we have things in the deck that if we do get to the top end, you know, to a lot more mana, you can kind of like, you know, play some more aggressive things in the sense like playing something like Agadium's Awakening, allowing us to get back any number of target creature cards that each have a different mana cost of X or less. Essentially at turn 7 we can get back any rare things that cost 4 or less, which is very good and very strong, especially if our opponent has spot removal or we just got really aggressive and just want to hit our opponent as hard as possible. So we're playing a little bit more of a flash version here, and that is also playing Zolpor's Duelist. It enters the battlefield up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. Its controller mills 2 cards, so essentially milling our opponent at flash speed. In a weird way, we can block something and our opponent may think it's going to get in, you know, for 2 damage or any damage, and we make it up, you know, give it -2, and now we block with a creature that they're not expecting, and then that creature does like 0 damage, and then we can kill it with a blocker possibility. Plus Chief Thirst is, I think, the new card I feel like everyone's playing because it's so cheap. I mean, though it's sorcery speed, it's just a very solid 1-drop removal. Thieves Guild Enforcer, it's a 1-drop 1/1. It eventually gets bigger once we have 8 or more cards in our opponent's graveyard. I know there's strategies to kind of like eliminate cards from your graveyard by playing, you know, things with escape to allow us to, you know, mill those cards. But essentially, if this goes off, we start playing a bunch of rogues at flash speed. We're just filling up our opponent's graveyard overall. Dryad's Disruption as a counter spell, you know, that makes our opponent counter target spell unless they pay 1. We can then play for a land in the later game if we really think our opponent's going to do something against it. We have Lofty Denial because most of our creatures, our rogues, have flying as one of their things, so it definitely does get better once we start having those flying rogues onto the battlefield. Heartless Act for some spot removal, down in the lock for spot removal and counters based on the amount of cards in our opponent's graveyard. Sorin Thought Thief, making our opponent mill more cards for each attacking rogue. Eventually, at some point, our rogues are going to get pumped because it's going to have 8 more cards in their graveyard, and all our rogues are going to get +1/+0, which makes it overall better. Brazen Bar for the bounce, and also the 3/1 Flash Flyer, which is very good. Nighthawk Scavenger to 3 mana +1/+3. You know, it getting bumped up depending on how many our card types are in our opponent's graveyard, which is very good. Death Touch and Lifelink makes it very hard for our opponent to attack into something like this. Slither Wisp, because why not? We're playing a flash style deck, so why not add Slither Wisp? It's going to allow us to draw a card and make our opponent lose a life. And then we got the Agadium's Awakening for the ability to get things back from our graveyard if things do die in the later game, as well as being able to play for a black mana source by paying 3 life untapped or just playing to play tapped. And of course, it wouldn't be a rogue deck without Zareth. It has flash itself, so if we just want to play for the 5 mana flasher, but we also, if we're gonna get a rogue in for not being blocked, we can always tap the 4, make it do damage to our opponent, and allowing us to get something from their graveyard onto our side of the battlefield. And then the mana base is kind of like this. You can kind of tweak it how you want. Like I said, the temples are okay, but if you want to play the lands that gain you life, that are also commons, that are also not as expensive, you can play that as well. We got Fable Passage for some of the mana fixin', and of course the 6 swamps, 5 islands, and 1 Castle Vantress. Overall, it's a very good deck. There are many different versions of it. You can kind of play how you want it. You can play the more standard version, which is just mostly rogues, or you can play the more flashy version, which is like this one. I also think I saw a CGB video where you played a more flash style of it. It's kind of where I got the idea of playing like Slither Wisp in the deck and kind of went that way. I don't really know how my list compares to him, but you know, overall the only thing that I know is very similar is the Slither Wisp and probably the Duelist, but they're both, you know, it's literally the same cards. It's just, you know, cookie cutter in one and taking out the other. With that being said, guys, these are like the current meta style decks out there. These are my versions of the meta decks. You can go onto AetherHub and look at the meta ones that are currently ranking based on win percentage, but these are my take on the decks. If you want to copy these lists or go to AetherHub and copy the lists that are on the meta list, you know, go for it. Links will be for my decks down in the description below. Guys, if you like the video, hit that like button. Definitely helps out the channel. If you want to know when I post more videos, hit the subscribe button. I will catch you in the next video.